Hey everyone, welcome back. This is where we left off in our last lesson. We added our food category and recipe structs, and we added our data set. All right, so in this lesson, we are going to jump into our storyboard and start working with our user interface, all right? So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to embed our view controller here inside of a navigation controller, okay? And we'll talk about what that is here in just a second. So with your view controller selected, come up here to editor and go down to embed in and select a navigation controller. Okay, and you'll see something like that happen. You can go ahead and drag that down and make that look a little nicer. Okay, so what you're seeing here is a navigation controller, and we have embedded our view controller inside of our navigation controller. So before we get too much into what it is, let's take a look at our beta again, okay? So here we have our view controller. So what you're seeing right here, this is what is actually being handled inside of the view controller. The rest of this up here, that is the navigation controller. Okay, so this part is embedded in the navigation controller as a whole. And now if I click on one of these, let's go to sandwiches here. If I click, then you'll see that we got this back button here, and we're getting this for free automatically by having this inside of a navigation controller. Okay, and if we click on another one, then we put on top of the previous view controller this new one, and we can very easily have navigation inside of our app without having to worry about and do it all manually. All right, so now let's talk a little bit more in depth about what the navigation controller is. All right, so it's a container view controller, which means that it embeds the content of other view controllers inside of itself. And segueing to another view controller will then add that view controller on top of the previous one, while also adding a back button automatically for us, just like we saw in our app. So if you tap on the back button, then it will remove or pop off the top view controller, going back to the one below it. All right, so a navigation controller object manages its child view controllers using an ordered array known as the navigation stack. Okay, the first view controller in the array is the root view controller, and it represents the bottom of the stack. The last view controller in the array is the topmost item on the stack and represents the view controller currently being displayed. So in this image, the settings view controller would be the root view, and it would have a navigation stack of two more VCs. So the first one, the settings view, is at index 0 of the navigation stack. The second is at index 1, and the third is at index 2. And when you tap back, it removes the top one from the stack. And that is how navigation controllers work. They are super handy for simple navigation apps. We get a lot of functionality for free right out of the box. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at the table view, all right? So we are going to still be putting stuff inside of our view controller. We don't actually have to do anything with our navigation controller from now on. All right, so I'm gonna open up our object library, and we are gonna just search for our table view. So if you search for table, you'll see a few things here. You'll see a table view controller, you'll see a table view, and a table view cell. Now the table view controller, you can actually, we'll pull this in here and take a look at it. What it does is it comes already built out with some of the functionality that we're going to put in manually, okay? And that's because I want you to kind of see all of the nuts and bolts of how this all comes together. For instance, this already comes with a table view cell, and if we implemented a UI table view controller, then it would already come with some of the delegate methods that we'll be implementing, okay? So don't worry about that one for now. Whoops, let me go ahead and delete that. Okay, so let's open our object library back up. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull in a table view. And it says here that the table view displays data in a list of plain, sectioned, or grouped rows. So just drag that right on in. And then I'm going to use our auto layout tools down here. I'm gonna click on the one that looks kind of like a TIE fighter to say add new constraints. And we want this to fill up the entirety of our view. So I'm going to pin it 0 from the top, 0 from the left, 0 from the right, and 0 from the bottom. And I'm going to uncheck constraint margins. Remember, if we check this, if we leave this checked, then we'll have some built-in margin on the sides. And I want it to just fill up the entire view. So I'm going to uncheck that. And then I'm going to say add those 4 constraints, and this will pull it out to fill the entire view. So I'm going to say add 4 constraints, and there we have it. Okay, so now let's take a look at our table view here. All right, let's check out its attributes inspector over here. And there's a lot of options here. Most of these you're never going to need to touch, okay? We will need a prototype cell, which we'll be adding here in just a second. But yeah, most of this we won't need. We'll change the separator here later on, but I want you to see it first before I turn it off. Selection, if for some reason you wanted the cells in your table view to require multiple selection, you could set that there. Yeah, I mean, most of this stuff, the default settings are just fine. If for some reason you don't like the bounce on scroll, then you could turn that off. If you wanted to get rid of the horizontal or vertical indicators for the scroll views. But yeah, almost all of this you won't ever need to touch. So now we have our table view, but we need what is called a prototype cell, okay? So if we look at our app again, what we have here, you can see that each of these cells are similar, right? Each one contains an image and a label, okay? And so what is happening here is that each one of these cells is being represented by a single prototype cell. And then the correct user interface data is being loaded into that prototype cell depending on which index path, or in other words, which row is being accessed, okay? So for this first one, this is for the burgers. This would be index path row 0. This would be index path row 1, 2, 3, and so on, okay? So once we go ahead and wire up our data source, then which is going to be this array right here. So we have burgers, pasta, pizza, etc. This data is going to be passed to our prototype cell, which these cells here represent, and then it's going to load up the correct things for us, okay? So we need to add a prototype cell. So opening back up our object library, I'm going to pull in this table view cell, and it says defines the attributes and behaviors of cells, rows in a table view. So I'm going to drag that in, and you can just drop it in anywhere. All right, so now let's take a look at our table view cell here in our view hierarchy. And just in case this is closed on you and you're not sure how to open it, it's this little button down here. All right, so this is our document outline, okay? And so that's how you can get that to open up if you accidentally close it. All right, so over here, let's take a look at its attributes inspector. And again, most of this stuff is totally fine as default. One thing right here that we're going to come back to is the reuse identifier. And I'm not going to go into that right now, but we're going to come back to that in a little bit. All right, right here is the selection. Right now it's on default, and I'm going to leave it at that for now. We're going to come back and change that later as well, but I want you to see what it looks like as a default first and why I don't really like it. All right, and then the rest of this is pretty much default is fine. If you wanted to change the background of the cell, you would do that here. If you want to change the alpha, the tint. One thing is if you're clicking on your cells and nothing is happening, make sure you have this checked. If you accidentally uncheck this, no matter how many times you tap on one of your cells, it's not going to work. All right, so make sure that that is checked. All right, so that is our table view cell. Next up, we have our content view, okay? So that's this highlighted blue area here, and we can actually resize this, just drag it down, and we're gonna resize ours to 200 high, all right? And this is where we can add content like images and labels and whatever it is that we want our cell to look like, okay? So looking at our app here, we know that we need to add an image and a label, and that we're gonna have some spacing around here. All right, so let's go ahead and add those UI elements to our content view. So I'm going to open up our object library, and we're going to need an image view. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that in, and I'm going to drag it up over here. And we are going to go ahead and add constraints to our image view. So I'm going to click here on our add new constraints, and we're going to put this 0 from the top. Then we're going to go 8 from the left, 8 from the bottom, and 8 from the right. Now you may be wondering why I'm not doing 8 on top as well, and that's because the cell below it also has an 8 from the bottom, and so then we would have double, we would have 16 in between the cells. All right, so I'm going to say add for constraints, and there we go. So here we can actually go ahead and add a placeholder image right here. I can say image, and let's go ahead and pick us a burger. Very nice. Okay, so if you recall with images, one of the things that we can change is the content mode, okay? So right now it's set to scale to fill. And so what that's going to do is it's going to just kind of scale it so that it fits in there regardless of aspect ratio. We want to keep the aspect ratio because that's what makes a picture not look squished. Okay, so I'm going to change this content mode to aspect fill. Okay, there we go, that looks better. And now let's go ahead and add our label. So I'm going to open up our object library again and search for label and just drag that right on in here. And let's change the color on that first off. I'm going to change that to white. Let's change the label to burgers. And let's change the font right here. I'm going to click on custom, and we're going to get the family of Futura. And we're going to make this style bold. Okay, and then we're going to bump this up to about 60 points. That looks good. I'm going to drag that label, put it in the center. And so let's go ahead and constrain this label, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and constrain it 20 from the left and right. And I'm going to uncheck constrain to margins, add those two constraints. Then I'm going to go ahead and center it vertically in the container. Okay, so now this is fully constrained, lines are blue, everything is good to go. Then I'm going to center our text, just like that. All right, and I think that is looking pretty good. One thing you might notice is that it looks like our image is kind of spilling over into what should be white space. So I'm going to select our image here. Now what we need to do is we want to say clip to bounds, and pay attention to right down here at the bottom when I clip it. So I'm going to check that, and that white part is now visible. So what that does is that just kind of clips it and removes any of the picture that is flowing outside of the frame of the image view. All right, so that is looking pretty good. And I think we can go ahead and end this video here. And just to recap, what we have learned is about how a navigation controller works. Remember that it is a container view controller that embeds the content of other view controllers inside of itself. And when you add other view controllers, you're adding to the navigation stack, where the root view controller is the 0th index of its navigation stack. And as you add more and more, you're adding to that navigation stack. And you can go backwards through the navigation stack and remove them as you go. Okay, then we took a look at the table view and how we can add a prototype cell and then add the UI elements that we need to it, all right? All right, so in the next lesson, we're actually going to take a little bit of a side tangent. We're even going to create a new project so that I can teach you about something called protocols and delegates. And it's going to be very important that you understand this concept as we move forward throughout this course, okay? So hang tight for that lesson coming up, and I'll see you then.